15th of May, 2008, City of Santa Barbara Planning Commission. Ms. Rodriguez, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Vice Chair Larson.
Here.
Commissioner Bartlett.
Here.
Commissioner Jacobs.
Here.
Commissioner Jostes.
Here.
Commissioner Thompson.
Here.
Commissioner White.
Here.
Chair Myers.
Here. Ms. Hubble, are there any requests for continuances, withdrawals, postponements, or addition of ex-agenda items?
Chair Myers, some of the minutes, items 3E through 3J, related to minutes and resolutions on February 14th and 21st and April 17th will be continued to May 22nd.
Thank you. Any announcements and appeals?
Yes. First of all, I need somebody from the Planning Commission to represent the Commission at Council on the 565 Yankee Farm Road appeal that is scheduled for June 17th.
I'll go to that one.
Okay. Ms. Jacobs? Thank you.
What was the date again, Jan?
June 17th.
Do we have a time certain?
It will be in the afternoon. That evening, they will consider the Veronica Meadows project. So that will be a 6 o'clock item. July 15th is the 1298 Coast Village Road appeal. I think we can wait to assign somebody from that. July 22nd is an appeal from the Architectural Board of Review to Council on the 1236 San Andres project. Although the issues that have been raised are primarily Planning Commission related, but I don't think that we need to have Planning Commission there again. So I think we're okay on that one. Also, just to let you know, we don't have a date yet, but the Marina Drive project that was approved the last meeting has been appealed. And that's all I have to report.
Do we know who appealed that?
Some of the neighbors.
Okay. Thank you. At this moment, we'll open up the hearing for comments from members of the public for items that are not on our agenda. So if there's anybody that wishes to speak, please step forward. I have one slip here from Mark Harris. Mr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner and Commissioners. My name is Mark Harris. My comment is about the proposed project at 528 Anacapa Street, which you approved on May 8th. I've watched the hearing several times online. My concern is that the verbal motion isn't completely consistent with your discussion. The minutes haven't been drafted yet, but the appeal period runs up this coming Monday, and if it is consistent, I would have no intent to appeal, but I'm very concerned. So I ask you to review the motion and to revise it if necessary so that it better reflects the intent of your discussion and your recommendations to the ABR. Specifically, the project was sent to the ABR with the request that the mass bulk and bulk of the project and the height be lowered by eliminating the garbage truck drive-through. This would lower both the southwest and the northeast corners and would no longer require that the building be thrust up against the northwest corner of Anacapa Street. I think the motion only referred to the southwest corner, so I ask you to review it, and it's a conundrum because the minutes haven't been drafted. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Seeing no one else wishing to speak, I'll close this portion of the hearing, the public comment hearing, and move on to our first item, which is an environmental hearing, final EIR certification, application of Peak Las Positas Partners, 900 to 1100 block of Las Positas Road, otherwise known as the Veronica Meadows Specific Plan. Yes, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be stepping down from this item. The applicant is represented by an attorney who's a member of my husband's law firm.
Thank you, Ms. Jacobs. Mr. Jostes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Likewise, I will be stepping down as well. My wife and I own property within 500 feet of the proposed project.
Thank you, Mr. Jostes. Mr. Bartlett.
I won't be stepping down, but I did want to announce that I met with the applicant once this week regarding questions that I raised in the last hearing regarding the bridge.
Thank you. Are there any other commissioners that wish to share any ex parte communications they've had with the applicant or otherwise? Seeing none, okay, thank you. Case planner for this is Allison DeBusk. Ms. DeBusk?
Thank you, Chair Myers and Planning Commission. This is a hearing to certify the proposed final EIR, which is an environmental impact report for the Veronica Meadows specific plan. The project site is located west of Las Positas Road and Arroyo Burro Creek and north of Allen Road. It is currently within the County of Santa Barbara and adjacent to a city-owned parcel that was recently annexed to the city. The project for which the environmental impact report was prepared is a proposed annexation of 50.5 acres. The land would receive general plan, local coastal plan, and zoning designations for residential and open space uses. 25 single-family homes are proposed on approximately 14.8 acres, and the remaining 35.7 acres would be dedicated open space. The project also includes creek stabilization and restoration along Arroyo Burro Creek, geologic stabilization, a public bridge across the creek for vehicular access, and the completion of the cul-de-sac at the end of Allen Road. Just to give you a brief recap as to some of the recent history on this project, in December 2006, the City Council certified the EIR and approved the project. This action was subsequently litigated in Santa Barbara Superior Court, and in February 2008, the City Council rescinded all project approvals in accordance with the judge's ruling. Essentially, the court judgment sent the matter back to the City Council for further consideration in conformance with CEQA. However, the EIR was not found to be inadequate as an informational document. So, even though the EIR was not found to be inadequate as an informational document, the city did prepare a revised EIR, selected chapters, in order to document some of the more detailed project information that we had received, some minor changes to the project, and additional information received since the 2005 final EIR was released. This revised EIR was prepared in accordance with CEQA guidelines, section 15088.5, and we did only recirculate those portions of the EIR that were revised. The final revised EIR includes the draft revised EIR with changes shown in strike through and underline, the comment letters received, and responses to those comments. The final EIR includes the original EIR from 2005 and the proposed final revised EIR. The purpose of today's hearing is to certify the final EIR, and the City Council will be asked to certify the final EIR and act on the project at a future date. The significant and unavoidable impacts identified in the EIR have not changed. They are impacts to biological resources due to habitat impacts from the bridge, impacts to cumulative traffic levels at local intersections, and construction truck noise on Allen Road. The significant but mitigable impacts identified in the EIR also have not changed. They are associated with biological resources, drainage, erosion, and water quality, geologic hazards, cultural resources, traffic and circulation, public health and safety, and air quality. The less than significant impacts identified in the EIR have not changed either. They include impacts associated with air quality, drainage, erosion, and water quality, visual resources, cultural resources, public health and safety, geologic hazards, noise, traffic, and public services. The beneficial impacts associated with the project have not changed either. They are related to traffic and land use and recreation, and that's due to the pedestrian and bicycle facilities proposed, and to biological resources from the creek restoration plan. I do want to note that we've received many letters on this project, and those have been distributed to the Planning Commission. The next step for the project is City Council consideration of the final EIR and project approval. This concludes staff's report, and I can answer any questions that you may have. We also have John Larson from URS, who is the city's consultant on this EIR, available to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff by the commissioners at this time? Mr. Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Normally, the Planning Commission certifies an EIR. In this case, you've said that the City Council will also certify the EIR. Does that mean that we're going to have two agencies certifying it, or are we just recommending certification to the council?
The Planning Commission is being asked to certify the document in accordance with the city's environmental review guidelines. However, we are also having the City Council certify the document to respond to the judgment, which requires the council to do so.
Okay. Thank you. Does the applicant have a presentation?
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Steve Americano. I'm from the Brownstein Law Firm. I'm representing Peak Las Positas Partners, the applicant here. Today, I have a brief presentation to make, and then I would request the Commission's indulgence for 5 minutes at the end of the public input so that we can respond to any questions or issues that may have been raised by the public. I would like to thank the staff for what I think is an excellent summary. I want to go back a little bit further in history, if I could, and to focus on the job before the Commission today. As the staff has explained, the issue presented to the Commission is whether or not to certify the EIRs having been completed in compliance with CEQA. That's not the same thing that you normally do. Normally you would review the EIR certified and then be asked to vote on the project permits as well. This Commission already voted on the project permits in December of 2005, and the matter was moved on to the City Council. Because of the court judgment, the City Council's decision was set aside, and therefore the matter is back before the City Council. That's the reason why this Commission is not being asked to vote on the permits today, because you've already voted on the permits. But since the environmental review, the EIR was revised, following the strict letter of the city's CEQA guidelines, the revisions to that EIR are being presented to you for certification. So the job you've got here today is considerably narrower than the one you usually have when you're faced with a project that's coming before you on environmental review. When the Commission last saw this project back in December of 2005, you had before you at the time an environmental impact report that had been prepared for over a year. There had been a full public comment period. There had been letters received, comments, and responses to those comments. That EIR was presented to the Commission, and the Commission voted unanimously to certify that EIR. We think that's an important step in this process, that the Commission found that EIR to be legally adequate and prepared in compliance with CEQA. The EIR that you have before you today simply builds on that earlier EIR. It is a further explanation of, has more detail, and more analysis of that earlier EIR. And I guess my thinking is if the earlier EIR was adequate in your mind, then the new one should likewise be adequate in your mind. The other important part of the history is that no one stood before you in December of 2005 and suggested that that EIR was inadequate. And nobody stood in court and said that that EIR was inadequate. And the judge said there was no argument that that EIR was inadequate. So again, we're building on a very solid base of an EIR which this Commission, the City Council, and the Court all found to be adequate. And that, to me, is an important piece of the history. In terms of the process followed to get to today, the revised EIR, the beginning point of that was in February. The revisions were prepared. The draft was released in March. It was open for a 45-day comment period, which is the full period required by law. You held a hearing on April 17th. You took comments. All of those written and oral comments were taken in and were responded to. And this final EIR is therefore before you. The Next step in the process, as the staff said, is a hearing before the City Council, which, as Ms. Hubble indicated, is presently scheduled for June 17th in the evening, at which this same document will be presented to the City Council. There are just a couple of points I would make about the substance of the document itself. You've received comment letters, and you'll see them in the final EIR, from two organizations, both of which were responded to. One is the Citizens Planning Association, and one is the Urban Creeks Council. Those were the two organizations that challenged the original project approvals in Superior Court. The issue related to the Allen Road alternative, the principal issue on which the court had a problem, was the fact that the City Council decided that the Allen Road alternative was not the alternative that they thought was the most appropriate alternative. What becomes clear in the EIR before you today, in the revised EIR before you today, is that the Allen Road alternative, under which the same project would be built, but all the traffic, instead of going across a bridge to Las Positas Road, would go down Allen Road, that alternative itself causes a Class 1 traffic impact. Now, that information was in the original EIR, but it wasn't as clear as it might have been in the documents related to the EIR. It becomes crystal clear in the document before you today that that's the effect of the Allen Road alternative. We think that that's an important clarification of the earlier document. As I say, all that evidence was there before. The other point is that in addition to the traffic impact, there's the construction noise impact. If the bridge is not built, all the construction traffic for the entire project will be forced to go down Allen Road for the entire period of time of construction of the project. That is to say, if the Allen Road alternative is chosen, all of the construction traffic will have to use Allen Road for access to the site. The project that we've proposed, which includes the construction of a bridge, will involve building the bridge first, and then using that bridge for all access to the site for all the construction equipment. And so the impact of the construction traffic on Allen Road will be limited. Instead of being the entire construction period, which might be 18 months, might be 20 months, 2 years, instead it's going to be limited to that period of time that it takes to build the bridge. And once the bridge is done and can be used by trucks, that's how access will be achieved to the site. That's the reason why the EIR before you points out that there is a serious exacerbation of a noise impact on the Allen Road neighborhood if you choose the Allen Road alternative, or if the City Council chooses it. So those are the 2 points I wanted to make about the substance of this EIR. We've looked at the document. We've looked at the process that the city followed. We think that the city staff and the consultant have done exactly what is required by CEQA to give the decision makers the information needed to make a decision on this project, and it's in compliance with CEQA, and we would urge an affirmative vote on the question of certifying the EIR. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Americano. At this time, I will open up the public hearing for this particular project. If anyone wishes to speak on this project, please fill out one of these green slips and give it to staff.
Mr. Chair Myers, I know that there were a couple of questions that people wanted to ask of Mr. Dayton, and he's only available until 2 o'clock. Don't know whether you want to ask your questions to him first, and then go to the public.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Dayton, would you like to come on down? Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Dayton, for being here. At the previous environmental hearing, there was a discussion about what would be that the alternatives that are being presented in the revised environmental document do not get to continue to have a Class 1 traffic impact. And the question that I raised, and I believe several of the people testifying as well of the citizen testimony, were asking the question: what would be the traffic level? What would be the the traffic count that would get below a significant adverse impact. Start with, okay, what's the sub-class 1 impact number, and work backwards into a development scenario.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner White.
On Allen Road, excuse me.
For the Allen Road alternative?
For the Allen Road option.
Well, for that alternative, it would be pretty challenging because if you recall, our threshold is adding traffic to an impacted intersection. And there is no way, I guess there is a way, if you built a house, you could access the city through Hope Ranch. It could be pretty indirect. But I would say pretty much any development.
So zero, there's a potential for zero development that would cause a class 1 impact.
I think we would say, I'm now starting to recall the analysis we did because we did look at that. I think we said 5 homes. So if you do 5 homes, you have an impact. If you do 4 homes, you don't.
Okay.
Given the way that we look at the traffic impacts.
Okay.
But it's a pretty low bar because obviously any house that we build over there, you can pretty much assume it's going to send traffic to that intersection.
Right. No, the realistic scenario is the customary traveled way, and the number is 4 would be sub-class 1.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Dayton? I don't think so. Thank you. Okay, let me open up the public hearing. I'll ask you all to confine your comments to 2 minutes per Planning Commission policy. Our first speaker is Thomas Bortolazzo, to be followed by Gil Berry.
Good afternoon. Thomas Bortolazzo. I'm a resident of the Mesa, 35 years, and a native of Santa Barbara. I use the Wilcox property and the Jesuit property several times a week. I'm in full support of the project. I think it's a clean project. I support the creek enhancements that are being offered by Veronica Meadows, and I'd like to see the approval made and the project go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Gil Berry, to be followed by Ken Sterling.
Hello, my name is Gil Berry, and I wanted to make it clear I'm speaking only as an individual. I would ask you to find the EIR as inadequate and send it back for further work on 4 different grounds. First of all, during the previous public comment, there were suggestions that the EIR did not show adequate structural drawings of the proposed bridge. Therefore, it's impossible to determine the environmental impacts without the complete drawings. I have the drawing of the cross-section of the bridge that was in the original EIR, and it does not show the structure. The cross-section shows that maybe 6 inches of paving, does not show the depth of the structure. Now, on the longitudinal section, it shows the structure being approximately 5 feet high to scale, and it shows the 100-year flood line of the water being approximately 5 feet below the bottom of that. Now, this bridge is going to have to clear span a minimum 140 feet, maybe 150 feet, and as an architect, it's my professional opinion that one could not span 150 feet clear span with a 5-foot structure. Therefore, without adequate structural drawings, it might be possible that this structure might be 10 feet deep. It'd go right down to the water line. Then when you have 100-year storms, the logs floating in the water would catch on the bridge and you'd have a flood. So it would be improper to certify this EIR without proper structural drawings of the bridge. It's just basic. Next, several people asked for financial feasibility analysis. Even though it's not required in this particular case, it would make sense as part of the record. And I feel that the staff just ignored all the people that suggested that. I heard planning commissioners suggest that. You were all ignored. And I feel you should send it back to ask for such a financial feasibility analysis to be included.
Will you please wrap up?
Yes. Next, it did not properly address the legal issue of whether or not access could even happen across the city-owned property, because it's my understanding that when the county gave money, that they had a deed restriction, not a deed restriction, a restriction recorded that might preclude the use of anything but recreational use on that land. And then lastly, at the last meeting, several people suggested that there be a but a feasibility study on Allen Road of a small project like we just discussed. Maybe it's 4 houses that could go through the intersection of Cliff Drive. Now, they talked about the impact at Cliff Drive under no signal. Now, it's said it's
Mr. Berry, please wrap up.
Yeah. A traffic signal light could be put on the intersection of Cliff Drive and Las Positas, and then it could handle more than 4 houses. That needs to be investigated. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken Sterling, to be followed by Naomi Kovacs.
Good afternoon. My name is Ken Sterling. I'm a 30-plus year resident of Santa Barbara. I'm an entrepreneur with several interests in Santa Barbara, and I'm also an environmentalist. I have a hybrid car, and I think what we're talking about here is a balance between entrepreneurialism and the environment. And I have no agenda, I have no vested interest in this project, but I've watched it with curiosity. Each time that Mr. Lee proposes something, it seems very reasonable to me, and we have these people that have agendas that come up and don't accurately reflect what their true agenda is. So all I encourage you to do is to ratify the decision that you made years ago that was in keeping with your good research and good findings, and I support Mr. Lee's project 100%. Thank you.
Thank you. Naomi Kovacs, to be followed by Mark Chiltilo.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I am Naomi Kovacs. I'm Executive Director of the Citizens Planning Association. You've seen my face at, I think, all but one of the hearings over the past 7 years on this project. We also were party to the lawsuit to which staff just referred today. As you know, CPA is an organization very committed to the public process. And so we're therefore quite concerned today that you are only discussing certification of the EIR, and discussion of the project will be left to Council. Under code, the Planning Commission has to make a recommendation for general plan changes, annexations, and subdivisions. Therefore, your review should be of the whole project, not just certification of the EIR. You shouldn't make a recommendation on the certification, however, until you make one on the project. These 2 actions should be connected, but somehow they've been disconnected and one action is being ignored. The Planning Commission is being cut out of one piece of the process, and as a result, so is the public. Turning away from general procedural matters to specific matters about the FEIR, I will start by saying that we had precious little time to really review the document. It was released on Friday. I was able to get one of the first copies on Friday afternoon, and there is a very thick document, as you all saw, with many comments and many replies to comments. So I will have to be quick. I wasn't able to review it in complete depth. Our attorney will speak more to these matters after I speak today. But 2 comments I will make. First, the city should consider a new lower density alternative for Allen Road access. We've asked previously for this, and we've suggested that the baseline be based on the number of units as deemed appropriate by an economic feasibility study, which has not been done. And there needs to be an economic analysis of the project proposal and alternatives. While it may not have to be in the EIR itself, as staff has said, it does have to be somewhere in the record. And it is not. Alternatives cannot be dismissed as economically infeasible if there is no supporting evidence in the record. The central question presented by the EIR regarding the feasibility of alternatives is expressly delegated to both the Planning Commission and Council, not just Council. With that in mind, this document cannot be certified, as it makes statements based on no supporting evidence, and you do have a role to play in that. So I hope you will consider that, and I hope you will listen attentively to what our attorney will say following me. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Chiltilo? Followed by Eddie Harris.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. My name is Mark Chatillo, and I'm the attorney representing the Urban Creeks Council and the Citizens Planning Association. Mr. Chair, I hope you'll indulge me a couple more minutes to be able to cover the points that I think are particularly important, in part in responding to Mr. Americaner's comments. I submitted a letter to you yesterday, and I hope that you've had a chance to review that. It goes to one of the fundamental questions about this hearing. What is this hearing about? And it's our opinion that legally the Planning Commission has a duty, obligation under law, under the charter, and under the municipal ordinance, as well as under the court's order, to consider the entire project. Staff has proposed that you may just consider the recertification of the EIR and that the prior approvals still stand. And if I could ask, there was the recent history slide, if you could put that up there for me, please. The court's order in the decision indicated that the city was required to set aside all of their decisions and approval, including not only the rescission of the ordinance and the resolution that the city council rescinded as part of their action, but also, quote, the nullification of all other city approvals and permits related to this project. Now, under the city charter and under the municipal ordinance, your Planning Commission has the obligation to review and take an approval action, even though it is acting as the advisory agency. It is an approval action on the project's merits itself. The judge ordered all approvals rescinded, and that is what the city attorney reported to the city, to Judge Anderle in this action. So therefore, based on the court decision and the actions by the city, there is no approval, there can be no approval of this project. And so, as Mr. Americaner pointed out, and I believe staff as well, it's very unusual for you to just have a certification matter before you, and in this case, it's procedurally incorrect. You have an obligation, and the community has an interest in participating in your Planning Commission's review of the project as a whole. There's another problem with just proceeding with certification. When the City Council rescinded the certification of the EIR, there was no legally adequate EIR present. You couldn't have your approval continue to stand when there's no EIR. It's a legal point, but I think it's an important one. Your prior approval was rescinded by operation of law as well as by action of the City Council, and so as a legal matter, you have an obligation to consider this, consider the entire project. Now, as a practical matter, we've seen in the EIR that the project description itself has changed. Now, does it make sense to you that the Planning Commission's prior approval of a different project can stand while you're being asked to certify an EIR which changes some of the analysis that you're being asked to consider? It simply doesn't make sense. Your action has to be to certify, if it is to certify, and to take action with respect to the entire project.
Mr. Chatillo, you're at 3 minutes. If you could,
okay.
I'll give you another minute.
The EIR itself states that, no, one of the key issues, I'll move on to my last issue, one of the key issues in the court and before you is the feasibility of alternatives. And you actually have heard testimony on this already today. In the EIR, they don't make a final conclusion as to the feasibility of the Allen Road alternative. That is, in my opinion, legal error. But the EIR does recite that there may be other factors. I'll quote, this EIR does not make any final determinations on the feasibility of alternatives presented, particularly with respect to economic, social, and housing factors that need to be considered in any final analysis of feasibility. I'm on page 4.1. These factors will be considered by the Planning Commission and City Council during their comprehensive review of the proposed project at public hearings following certification of the EIR. Now, it may be that staff intends that there will be another set of PC hearings that will occur after your certification action, if that's in fact going to proceed. But that's not what they indicated as the steps that are going to be followed. It's going to the City Council. Now, the EIR itself is contradictory in the responses to comments. They speak to this process. They basically tout the city attorney's line that the prior approval stands. So you can't certify, just going to the action that is before you today, it's improper to certify a document which is itself internally inconsistent. So there are some significant problems here, and they go to the core issue of this finding of feasibility. We deserve that discussion. We don't deserve having this economic information, if anything is going to come forward, presented at the last minute. We don't deserve this being put as a political football to the City Council. This is part of the environmental review process that goes to the essence of the adequacy of the EIR.
Thank you.
And we appreciate your looking at those issues as part of your evaluation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eddie Harris, to be followed by Mike Jordan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. My name is Eddie Harris, and I'm the president of the Santa Barbara Urban Creeks Council. And we feel strongly that the document needs to be revised to include an economic analysis of the scaled-down alternative, as has been repeatedly asked for. The document also fails to provide analysis of upstream conditions and hazards, namely the unstable slopes on Campanile Hill and creek bank conditions that have resulted from urbanization upstream. Additionally, the document fails to adequately evaluate new information about trail alternatives as outlined in letters that have been submitted. The document fails to address channelization intentions that were part of the previous planning record. These issues are raised to correct deficiencies in the document so that the project's impacts will be minimized as a result of your deliberations. Please avail yourselves of the public's input that has been offered. That's why the California Environmental Quality Act exists. It's a tool to enable you to do your job, and it's a disservice to the public to ignore important public input. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Jordan, to be followed by our last speaker, Dennis Peterson. Mr. Jordan.
Good afternoon, Chair Myers and Commissioners. Standing before you as an individual today, you know, I followed this project as part of a committee, but I'm also an interested Mesa resident. I guess I would just make the case that the EIR has done exactly what it's supposed to do. It's gone through the process and it's given you a document that has reached conclusions, and those conclusions are supposed to just be available with evidence for the next set of discussions and approvals that will be needed. It's simply holding this document hostage, leading it to redundant questions and repeated uses of falsehoods, just further delays the process and gets it away from what it's supposed to do. Particularly galling to me were several items in the public comments and questions that could be called either incorrect, as they were politely by staff, or initial falsehoods. And that's statements such as this project will give public land to private party for profit, that it will decrease watershed water quality, that an easement will be given to the development for its benefit only, that it will destruct meadowlands, and that a use of a specific plan will lead to higher density development than would be there normally. All of those were false the moment they were put down on paper, and they were called incorrect by staff. And it's certainly time for people who will appreciate this project to stand up and take note of tactics like that and let their voices out. Thank you.
Thank you. Our last speaker will be Dennis Peterson, unless we receive any more of these.
As a 38-year resident of Hidden Valley neighborhood, it pleases me to see a thoughtful, well-thought-out project such as Veronica Meadows come through the process. And we know what a process it's been. Modest density with an affordable component, just the type of a project we need. What impresses me most, however, is the very measured approach to crossing the creek and the detailed and sensitive approach to creek restoration and maintenance. And it doesn't cost us any money. Wow, imagine that, forever, too. I've watched over the years the challenges we faced at Arroyo Burro Creek, culminating with the near disaster at Valley Verde a few years ago. Now we have a chance to regain access, sadly lacking in Hidden Valley, to the creek. How nice it will be to hike by the creek finally. I believe it's also a much-needed step in cleaning up the creek and improving water quality. Who can forget that disgusting mess at the Arroyo Burro Beach where that creek terminates? It's also nice to see organized homeowner associations support the project that they feel has all of the issues, to quote, adequately and properly analyzed. In this era of declining revenue, sagging economy, and a decidedly diminished capacity to do absolutely everything, wouldn't it be nice to go forward with something reasonable and doable? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll close the public hearing portion of this for this project and bring it back to the Commission for more questions and comments. Mr. Thompson.
I have two questions for staff. I'd like to ask the city attorney to comment on the assertion that any action that we take that doesn't include the full project is somehow illegal.
Mr. Chair, members of the Commission, it's the city's intention to follow the court's order. The city has, as the court ordered, denied or retracted the ordinance and resolutions that were adopted by the City Council, and we are going through the recertification of this EIR document. It is the city's opinion that we are complying with the order of the court, and while there may be a disagreement by the plaintiffs in that, it is the city's intention to comply with the court order. And we believe our process that we've laid out is doing so.
Okay, a second question for the staff. It was asserted by one of the speakers that many of the issues raised in letters to the staff regarding the EIR were not answered. Were any letters received not answered in the appendix to the EIR?
Chair Myers, in response to Commissioner Thompson's question, those comment letters that were received prior to the close of the public comment period, there is a response to each and every letter in the document. There are a number of comment letters that have been provided to you that were received after the close of the public comment period. Those we do not have specific written responses to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the concerns that I had raised at the previous hearing was about our water supply. And I imagine that Mr. Ferguson may be here in response to my request. And thank you, Bill, for coming. And I would appreciate the chance to ask him a couple of questions on that.
Sure. Mr. Ferguson.
Basically, I want to lay out my thought first, and that is we've had two substantial changes in our water supply demand ratios since this project was last reviewed. Number one is the Zaca fire, and number two is the Plan Santa Barbara research, which shows that this city has something on the order of between 5,000 and 6,000 units potential development, which we did not know about before, and that hasn't been on the books. It's in all commercial corridors, and of course it's where we're seeing the action. It is the mixed-use development is the way of the future in Santa Barbara. So I asked a question about that, and it is one of my concerns about the EIR that it doesn't address that, in my opinion, adequately. And there was a response made. But so that's what I wanted to ask water staff about was what has occurred in a way. I'm sure that you've been looking at the impact of the Zaca fire, and to me, the best analogy goes back to the Coyote fire. And is that a reasonable comparison to make? Is that the Zaca fire and the Coyote fire would be cousins in terms of their impact on the, let's just say, the Gibraltar Reservoir?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner White, yes, there would be, to my knowledge, comparable types of impact in terms of both water quality and water supply storage capacity. Our immediate concern has been water quality. That's been an ongoing challenge for us. Our treatment staff is working very hard to address that. Your concern is more targeted toward water supply.
Quantity, yeah.
Yes, and the yield of the reservoir. That continues to be an important source of our supply. We don't know the reduction in the capacity yet. We do anticipate that there's some significant reduction. We'll be doing a bathymetric study probably within the next several months to confirm the change since the study that was done in September of '07, after the fire but before any runoff. And so that'll be a good comparison about the siltation resulting from runoff the first year of the fire. Now, one of the points to remember is that we expect probably further effects depending on the extent of rainfall and the intensity of rainfall. So we'll watch that over the next several years. My feeling is we probably got a good chunk of what we're going to get already. We'll know more about that when we get the bathymetric study. When we talk about Gibraltar, it's important to remember that that reservoir has always been anticipated to be a siltation problem. Our planning has recognized that. In fact, we have an agreement in place with the downstream interests that we refer to as the pass-through agreement. It protects the capacity of Gibraltar by allowing the city, under agreement, to pass water into Cachuma for separate accounting under the city's name. We are also doing analysis of that agreement, and the goal of that is to determine the extent to which yield may be reduced to some extent as a result of the smaller storage capacity. We expect that to be relatively minor compared to total yield of the reservoir. I don't want to give you numbers on that yet because we haven't finished our analysis, but that pass-through agreement was created and adopted with the intent to preserve the capacity of Gibraltar Reservoir into the future, and it was agreed to by the downstream interests, and we consider it to be a valuable tool as far as maintaining that.
Certainly. Mr. Americana was very active in that, the formulation of that. On the Coyote Fire, on the loss of capacity in Gibraltar, what was the loss of capacity at Gibraltar Reservoir over, let's say, a 5-year period after the...
I don't have the numbers, but the important point is that it did happen over a number of years.
Right.
And so that's why we're careful to leap to conclusions based on the year that we've had to date. So we'll be watching that over the future, particularly the next several years. Again, though, the pass-through agreement was specifically put in place to address that concern and to provide the city with some protection on that issue.
And then finally, has the water agency started work on the demand requirements, the additional supply that would be needed to serve the previously unknown residential units that have now been discovered in the city of Santa Barbara?
Yes, and this is what we regard as an iterative process between water staff and planning staff to work toward that goal that's going to be recommended to the commission here and to the city council for a target for amendments to the general plan. We would note that there's been a significant level in demand reduction compared to our starting point almost 20 years ago when the general plan was last updated and the current water supply plan was implemented. We projected a target of being at a normal demand of about 16,400 at the end of the 20 years. That included about 1,500 acre-feet of conservation that would have basically offset new demand from new development. We now stand at a demand of about 14 to 15, depending on weather. So that's a significant savings. That demand will be considered as a part of the demand estimate and how we're going to meet it. It's a little early to tell how we're going to meet it because we don't know the exact demand target. We are initiating some technical studies to see what the options are to meet that. That ranges from enhanced recycled water expansion, more conservation programs, state water reliability assessment, desalination reactivation assessment, basically looking at all of our supplies and see how they're going to fit in over the next 20-year period and beyond.
And I would presume also you would be looking at what I didn't ask you about, which is Cachuma also was affected by the Zaca fire, as I recall.
To some extent, and to a lesser extent, partly because less of the watershed was burned, and also because it's a much larger reservoir. And I believe the fact that there's shallower gradients in the topography there that contributes to less impact as far as siltation. But that will be part of our planning too. We want to make a number assessment of what the future of Cachuma is and include that in the plan.
And those pieces would be available to the commission's and the city's deliberations in what time frame? Do you?
Our initial round is to get these technical studies done in time for the development of the EIR so that those impacts can be assessed. And when the question comes up, what kind of demand could be met with city water supplies that are available, and what would be the impacts and the cost of those supplies, we want to be prepared at that time to provide.
So in the fall sometime?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Chair, thank you for letting me
Sure.
One thing
give
I
those
would like
questions.
to add to that discussion, if I could, is that the long-term water supply plan includes a trigger point that that says that when we get to within 10% of the available supply, that we stop and reassess. And we have not reached that trigger point. In fact, we're a ways from it, and Mr. Ferguson can probably indicate what that trigger point is.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, on that. Now, should I continue with my comments then?
Why don't you give me 1 minute to allow
questions.
Mr. Americano to respond? Give him 1 minute and 30 seconds to do so.
Actually, I just need 10 seconds. Only one point I want to respond to. Apparently, Mr. Chitillo delivered a letter to the city. We had inquired just before lunch about whether there was such a letter. We've not seen it. I don't think staff has seen it. So
I haven't seen it either.
No, we haven't
I guess I'd just like the record to reflect that nobody has seen the letter, so that it's not part of the record before this board. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Bartlett.
Mr. Chair, point of order. I emailed the letter in question into the link on the website for this project, for the city's web page. So
Why don't you clarify when you did that, since you're here?
Yesterday afternoon.
Okay.
Before 5 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bartlett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, unfortunately, I had a question for Mr. Ferguson, who left the room while we were having a point of order. So I will ask it of staff then. I mean, this is a currently county-zoned parcel surrounded by the city. If it isn't rezoned or annexed to the city and have city water, it can get water through the county. I think the county would be obligated to serve it. The water would come from the same reservoirs, and it would probably come out of the city pipe with a reciprocal agreement between the agencies. So that's what I'd like to have some clarity on. I mean, it's not whether or not the city can provide the water. It's a county parcel now, and the county has the water as well, and it's all coming from the same pond. So I just want to understand if that's a correct analysis.
That's correct analysis.
Right. So if we deny it, they just get the water from the county then, from the same pond. Okay.
Okay. Mr. Vincent, may I ask just a clarifying question of you regarding this nullification of all prior decisions that issue that was brought up? I know that you specifically addressed Mr. Thompson's question, and our purview was addressed in that answer, and I appreciate that. But can you tell me about this nullification and whether this project will be coming back to us because of that nullification, or if it's accurate?
Mr. Chair, actually, I was not involved in advising the City Council, and I have not participated in this. I think Mr. Wiley would be better to answer this particular question. And so I can get he's available. There he is.
And one thing I'd like to point out while Mr. Wiley comes up is that the Planning Commission did not approve nor deny the project when it was before the Commission the last time around. The Planning Commission referred the decision to the City Council, and because the Commission was deadlocked.
Correct.
Mr. Chair, our understanding, I don't have the judge's decision in front of me, but the last time I looked at it, the case was about a legal challenge to the City Council's decision. And the judge decided and ordered those decisions, the ordinance, the resolutions of the City Council undone. In practical terms, to us, that meant it took the project back to a point in time, theoretically, what was it, the fall of 2006, after the Planning Commission had acted on this project, as Ms. Hubble just described, and before the City Council had made any determination. So in theory, that's where we are. We're back there, except that the judge made it clear, or it became clear to us as a result of the judicial decision that the EIR did need to clarify some things.
Great. That clarifies a lot. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll bring it back to the Commission for comments. Mr. White, did you want to start this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I have three concerns about the EIR that make it so that I cannot find it to be adequate. First of all, I think that it needs the alternative that Mr. Dayton perhaps was alluding to, if it's a 4-unit project, or if it's, which has no Class 1 impacts. It's my understanding that is a CEQA requirement. There be one alternative that has no Class 1 impacts. Perhaps there's another option of improving the intersection, which then would allow more development to occur, but that would be, of course, a variant on that theme. Secondly, I strongly disagree with the county, the city's analysis of the county unincorporated alternative. I do not think that the zoning, my work in the county has always strongly indicated that the zoning is only the first step toward getting a development approval. One has to go through a litany of general plan policies which would all restrict development on this site. So I believe that an unincorporated site, certainly including rezoning property that is now zoned for open space, basically the 20 acres per unit, I think the county could have a hard time allowing that zoning change to occur. Finally, as I was just sort of questioning Mr. Ferguson about water, I am deeply concerned about the city being able to provide the properties that are within our boundaries with the resources for development. Basically water and sewage, sewage treatment, traffic capacity. I think that the staff's excellent work on this revolutionary change to our transportation corridors, which is wherein mixed development is the rule of the day, is going to change the face of our resource balance. And I think it's Charter Section 1507 is the sort of the message that we have in our charter for us to look at that very carefully. So before we annex property, I think that Charter Section 1507 needs a headline section in this EIR, and our living within our resources needs to be given a full measure of attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me continue with Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, as we've heard reiterated by the city attorney, our purpose today is to review and, if appropriate, certify the final EIR on this project. So I'm not going to talk about project issues. I'm going to talk about EIR issues. We've heard a lot of opinions as to what CEQA does or does not require. And as far as I know and what the attorneys have told us, this EIR and the supporting documentation comply fully with CEQA. This project has been reviewed exhaustively over the past decade. I wasn't on the PC when the original EIR was certified, but I've read the original EIR at least twice, the new draft changes more than twice, and I don't think that replowing all of that already plowed ground is going to turn up anything new that hasn't already been covered over the last decade. I will reiterate my position that after doing all that review, my position on the issue of Class 1 determination for the access bridge is incorrect. But having said that, it's been in there for at least over 2 years. The mitigation measures will be the same whether it's a Class 1 or a Class 2. And I will defer to the staff's position that it's a difference of opinion among experts, and the staff recommendation to take the conservative approach is the safe way to go. I'll defer to that, and I won't belabor that point anymore. So my position is that the proposed final EIR does constitute a complete and accurate effort towards the disclosure of the environmental impacts of the project. It's in compliance with CEQA, and I believe the Commission should certify the proposed final EIR and send it forward to the city council with findings that are listed in the staff report.
Thank you. Ms. Larson.
I have no differing opinions from Mr. White's.
All right. Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I also agree with Mr. Thompson's analysis. My questions in the last hearing were mostly revolved around the bridge issue, and I think the more research that I did and the in-depth reading with all the material that we've received, I agree with Mr. Thompson. I don't even think that that's a Class 1 impact on the bridge, but it's a more conservative analysis, so I do think that this EIR would be complete, even calling it a Class 1. Listening to the presentation today on how the bridge being built first even further lessens the impact to the neighborhood, I think is a really strong argument, and I think that the bridge is the way to go. Also, I know there were issues brought up about the fact that the bridge crosses city land that's intended for recreation or park purposes. The road actually is going to be a public road, so I don't think that that would be an issue, crossing that parcel with a public road. So for me, I could certify the EIR as currently revised, and I think it covers all the bases, and I think this project has been on paper way too many years. I think we're cutting down more trees doing EIRs than doing the project, so I'd like to see it move along.
Thank you. May I ask a question of staff regarding the annexation issue? And if it wasn't annexed, the point that Mr. White brings up regarding the one unit per 20 acres issue and how that stands with the juxtaposed with annexation. And
Chair Myers and Commissioners, when the analysis was done on that alternative, it assumed the county zoning, so that the 1 per 20 acres for that portion of the parcel that is designated in the county at 1 unit per 20 acres was assumed that way. But then we also looked at what the zoning was on the remainder of the development area for the parcels, which is 1 unit per, or 4.6 units, I think, per acre. So that was the basis upon which we did that. So at least in that sense, I do think that Mr. White brings up an issue about how the county policies might affect that number. But, you know, we can't do a complete county analysis on how those numbers would be affected. So what we try to use, and what most EIRs try to use, is actually just looking at the allowed density as the basis for developing the alternative.
thank you. Well, I certainly appreciate Mr. White's perspective and comments. I think that we really all have to take note of them. But as this project and the trail that it has traversed goes, I think that this EIR satisfies all of the questions that everybody has asked, and I as well would have questions as to how significant some of the impacts really are, like the bridge and some of the other. I recognize this as a very conservative approach, and certainly find that in its specific scope, I think it satisfies all the requirements of CEQA and completes all of the intentions of its purpose. So I can certify. I can find for the final certification of it. So I will call the question, Mr. Thompson.
I move that the Commission certify the proposed final EIR with findings in the staff report.
Second.
Second by Mr. Bartlett. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Motion carries 3-2. Is this appealable?
Yes, it is.
This is appealable to City Council in 10 days, within 10 days. Sure. Let's take a 10-minute recess to just stretch. We'll convene back here. I'll reconvene at exactly 2:30. Okay, I'll reconvene the May 15th, 2008 meeting of the Santa Barbara Planning Commission. Our next item is item number 4. It's an environmental hearing, application of April Verbanek and Ken Marshall, DUDEC for Regency Centers, 3757 through 3771 State Street. Let me just make a note here that this is only an environmental hearing. It's not a concept review. Does staff want to comment on that? Why the concept review was taken off, or what the story is?
The applicant requested that this not be a concept review hearing, although we did warn them that it doesn't prevent people from making comments about the project itself.
Okay, great. Our case planner and staff presentation will be given by Allison DeBusk.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Commissioners. As you mentioned, today's hearing is an environmental hearing to take comments on the draft mitigated negative declaration and draft initial study that were prepared for the proposed development located at 3757 through 3771 State Street. The project site is located at the southwest corner of State Street and Hitchcock Way and is approximately 5.4 acres. The project involves the demolition of all existing buildings on site and a good portion of the existing site improvements, and construction of 72,209 square feet of commercial space contained within 5 buildings. Also proposed are 15 residential condominiums, as well as creek stabilization and restoration and public improvements. The environmental review process for this project has included city staff's preparation of an initial study. Based on this initial study, staff determined that the project would not result in any significant unmitigable impacts. Therefore, a draft mitigated negative declaration was prepared. The mitigated negative declaration was released on May 5th, 2008, and the public comment period ends on June 4th, 2008. The potentially significant mitigable impacts identified in the MND are in the areas of air quality, biological resources, cultural resources, geophysical conditions, noise, public services, transportation circulation, and water environment. For the areas of cultural resources, geophysical conditions, noise, and public services, standard mitigation measures will address the impacts that are identified in the initial study. Turning to air quality, I do want to note that staff has discovered an error in the calculation of the net project emissions. We have gone back and we will correct this error, but the updated results still put the project below the city's threshold of significance. So the conclusion remains that those impacts are less than significant. All required air quality mitigation measures are standard and are primarily related to short-term construction impacts. In terms of the biological resources impacts, this project site is bounded by San Roque and Arroyo Burro creeks. San Roque Creek is considered stable. However, the banks of Arroyo Burro Creek are actively eroding. The existing development includes paved surfaces to the top of slope of the creeks. No special status plant species were detected on site, and mitigation has been proposed to address potential impacts to monarch butterflies and raptors that may occur as a result of construction. A restoration plan has also been proposed as part of the project to mitigate impacts to the loss of wetlands associated with the creek stabilization and also to improve the creek habitat. Traffic impacts associated with the project are considered adverse but less than significant because the applicant has proposed implementation of the traffic signal improvements that were identified in the Upper State Street study. These are impacts at the Las Positas State intersection and the Las Positas-Calle Real intersection. Traffic impacts at the State Hitchcock intersection are considered less than significant. Parking impacts for the project are potentially significant but mitigable by adding one additional parking space so that the project meets parking demand. In terms of water quality, there is currently no retention or treatment of stormwater on site, and all runoff goes into the creeks untreated. The project would result in a reduction of impermeable surfaces on site, and it would not result in any increase in runoff. All runoff would be treated prior to discharging into the creek, as well as some water being retained on site. Standard mitigation measures would reduce potential impacts from stormwater runoff to less than significant levels. The next steps for this project are, first, the close of the mitigated negative declaration review period on June 4th, 2008. An architectural board of review hearing is tentatively scheduled for June 2nd, 2008. Following the close of the public comment period, staff will prepare a final MND, and that will include responses to all public comments received, as well as comments received at today's hearing. And then finally, the Planning Commission will hold a hearing to consider the final MND and the project itself. That concludes staff's report. I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions of staff at this time? I see none. Does the applicant have a presentation they'd like to make or anything to add?
Good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thank you very much. My name is Erwin Busey. I'm with Regency Centers. The reason we are not able to have a concept review is Brian Cornell is our project architect, and I believe he's at an AIA function, so he's out of town in Boston right now. We started on this project 4 years ago. and we've worked diligently with the City of Santa Barbara and Whole Foods Market to create a best-in-class project. We fully support staff's recommendation for mitigated negative declaration as the appropriate environmental document. I think you will be pleased, as shown, with the amount of enhancements that we've made to the project, from sustainable components to connectivity to creek restoration, as well as a number of significant community benefits. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the applicant? Seeing none, I will open up the public comment hearing for this project. I'd like for the public to contain their comments to 2 minutes. Our first public speaker is Janice Brown, to be followed by Naomi Kovacs.
Hi, good afternoon. Chair Myers and Commissioners, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Janice Brown. I'm the mother of 2, and I'm not connected at all in any way with this project. I'm just a concerned citizen. I live in San Roque, Upper State Street, and I greatly would like this project to go through. I really want Whole Foods in our town, and I love what they're doing with the creek restoration. I moved here over 6 years ago and had frequented Whole Foods for many years, and I think that it would be a wonderful addition to our community. In addition, I know that there may be some traffic increase, and my feeling is I drive that all day long, every day, back and forth, and I don't care. I know it's not going to be significant enough. I want this project to go through. And I think I speak for many people who are like me, who would like to be at this meeting today, picking up the children, whatever it is, who want Whole Foods here. And so I wanted to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Naomi Kovacs, to be followed by Paul Hernandi. Naomi, I understand that you wrote us a letter that we just got.
I was just going to say that. We thought that it had been received, and I guess it was received but not distributed to you, so I'm not sure why that wasn't distributed. And have you gotten it, or you just got it late?
We have it, and some of us have read it, but since it's been late, why don't you take a little bit more time?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that greatly. I'm Naomi Kovacs. I'm Executive Director of the Citizens Planning Association, and right now I speak to you on behalf of our South County Land Use Committee. I will be one of 3 speakers summarizing the 3-page letter that you received and that we just talked about. We will also submit some more comprehensive comments and critiques of several sections of the initial study before the June 4th deadline. But for today, we'll have time to touch on 4 main concerns that we have. The first being neighborhood compatibility, the second, creek restoration, the third, traffic, and the fourth, parking. I'll address the first 2. Paul Hernandi will follow me to address the third, and Patricia Hiles will talk about the fourth point. First, the size, bulk, scale, and some other features of the project prevent it from being compatible with adjacent land uses. The applicant proposes a 28% increase in commercial development and 15 additional, mostly 3-bedroom condos. This overdevelopment entails loss of open space and the unprecedented rooftop parking of 119 vehicles climbing and descending through an unsightly creekside ramp. The project also requires your approval of an unusually large Measure E allocations and several zoning modifications for reduced setbacks and parking. We note that both the enhanced commercial activity and the 13 proposed market rate residential units would generate much new need for service workers while only supplying a required minimum of 2 inclusionary housing units. Our second concern concerns the protection of creeks and water quality. We agree with the recent staff report that the proposed 25-foot minimum building setback from the top of bank of San Roque and Arroyoboro Creeks ought to be enlarged. Furthermore, we're very concerned that even this low level of creek protection for 2 important watersheds would be subject to several encroachments into the setback areas. I'll now turn the podium over to Paul Hernandi, who will discuss our further concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair Myers, Planning Commissioners, good afternoon. I am Paul Hernandi here to highlight some of our committee's written critique of the initial study's approach to vehicular circulation. In a nutshell, we believe that the project's traffic impacts are incompletely analyzed and that the proposed mitigating measures are inadequate. For example, the vehicular circulation will not simply increase by over 1,300 average daily trips and close to 200 PM peak hour trips. Rather, the area's traffic will become different in kind when the frequent diesel-powered truck deliveries to Whole Foods become a standard feature of two-lane Hitchcock Way. Furthermore, the most severe traffic impact will occur in a block to which the YMCA, a physical therapy institute, and 2 Sensum clinics, pediatrics and urgent care, attract many vulnerable drivers and riders. Even so, the initial study ignores the traffic impact on Hitchcock Way and singles out 2 relatively distant intersections for the sole mitigation it requires for reducing the project's long-term transportation impact. The applicant is directed to install a dedicated right turn arrow and alter signal phasing at the Las Positas State and the Las Positas Calle Real intersections. The total cost of these 2 alterations was estimated in the February 2007 Upper State Street Traffic Circulation and Parking Study as $10,000. But this relatively modest expenditure is expected to yield spectacular results. A reduction of the vehicle-to-capacity ratio from 78 to 69% at one intersection, and a reduction from 82 to 72% at the other. And these astonishingly low figures are projected for the year 2016, despite predicted annual increments of traffic. Since the current utilization rates are 79 and 75% at those intersections, we wonder why the Transportation Division has not yet implemented such an apparently simple measure to expedite traffic flow at 2 already congested intersections. More importantly, we urge our decision makers to advance $10,000, or even somewhat more if necessary, to implement the proposed signal phasing alteration and thereby test its actual effect before accepting it as adequate mitigation for a potentially significant environmental impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Patricia Hiles will be followed by Mel D. Meyer.
Good afternoon. I'm the third head of CPA today. But I do want to mention to you, I emailed a longer message to the commissioners yesterday afternoon, and that was on my own hook. That is not the position of CPA, that's the position of Patricia Hiles, just to make that clear. My focus for CPA now is on several site-specific circumstances ignored in the initial study's determination of parking demand. We believe that the following circumstances deserve careful scrutiny as you consider the applicant's request for a significant modification of the full zoning requirement. Whole Foods, Circuit City, and possibly some of the smaller retail establishments are most unlikely to restrict their operations to weekdays or to anything like a 9-to-5 schedule. And even Citibank needs employee and customer parking for several hours on Saturday. It is therefore problematic to limit most resident and visitor parking to just one reserved space per unit, especially since the majority of the units will have 3 bedrooms. The city cannot prohibit households from owning more than 1 car, but should encourage residents to leave their cars parked and walk, bike, carpool, or ride the bus to work. At the same time, this desirable scenario are not to cause the project's overflowing parking to occupy stalls at the adjacent YMCA, and therefore force that nonprofit organization to hire guards to enforce parking rules. To conclude the summary for CPA, we doubt whether all environmental impacts of the project are either less than significant or can be mitigated as easily as the initial study seems to suggest. As a result, we believe that this large project being reviewed today warrants a focused EIR rather than a mitigated negative declaration. We thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Mel D. Meyer, to be followed by Steve Cushman.
Good afternoon. My name is Melody Meyer, and I'm the owner of Martial Arts Family Fitness, a school that services hundreds of students from Carpinteria to Goleta in downtown Santa Barbara. We are excited about Whole Foods coming to Santa Barbara. As a fitness instructor and nutritional counselor, it is important to me that the families of Santa Barbara have a choice when looking for healthy, organic, and nutritional food alternatives. As a business owner, I am excited as to the upgrade that this store will bring to the proposed area. The Whole Foods building will contribute to Santa Barbara's aesthetic standards and Santa Barbara's reputation as a leader in sustainable development. Whole Foods sets a wonderful new standard to community impact by giving back, which I also appreciate and aspire to. It is my request to get Whole Foods in Santa Barbara as soon as possible and to resolve any of these outstanding issues that are brought up today in order to service the families of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Cushman, to be followed by Steve Bird.
Chairman Myers, Commissioner Steve Cushman, I represent the Santa Barbara Chamber of Commerce, and we encourage you to accept the EIR as presented. We think this is a good project, and we think that's one ugly corner right now, so you've got a chance to let Brian clean it up, and we're very supportive of Whole Foods as a business entity and love to see them in Santa Barbara. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Bird, to be followed by Melissa Marstead, who will be our last speaker unless we receive any more of these. Is Mr. Bird here? He left? Oh, may I have that back for just a sec? Thank you. Thank you. The comment is that I live in the neighborhood and want the project to proceed. In favor of the project. Hello, Melissa Marstead.
Hi. I'm thrilled to be here in support of the proposed Whole Foods project. I've been following the project for over what I thought was 5 years, but I hear today it's only been 4, but it feels like forever. I first visited a Whole Foods in Salt Lake, and since that time I now seek out Whole Foods when I travel. What I found out when I was trying to do a little bit of research for this project, I found out that Whole Foods focuses on making an economic, environmental, and community connections to buy from local farmers to offer produce that's in season. And I was at a Whole Foods in Bellevue, Washington earlier in February and was shopping for a friend's birthday. And I went from the cheese section and had somebody helping me specifically on cheeses from Washington and Oregon. Then I went to the wine section, focusing on wines from Washington, and the fish was all local, so I could see it all in action. And the customer service is impeccable. So buying locally reduces the environmental impacts and costs of transporting products, thus reducing delivery trucks on the 101. And I also understand that most of the money that they spend on buying local products stays in the community. Another thing I learned, which I'm not sure if you know, is that in addition, Whole Foods also makes low-interest loans to local farmers and other small producers. Some of the eligible products include agricultural crops, value-added food products, and other all-natural grocery items. I also stand here before you as a fundraiser and grant writer here in town for nearly 20 years. Whole Foods would have a tremendous impact on some of our local nonprofits. Each store has quarterly 5% days, with 5% of the proceeds going to local nonprofits. Locally, Whole Foods might donate food to a shelter or labor to build a playground or other educational environmental causes. Regionally, several stores can team up to sponsor an event. In addition, Whole Foods is the only Fortune 500 company that purchases wind energy credits to offset 100% of its electricity use. I also understand the project addresses other green building elements. Overall, Whole Foods is committed to sustainability and making the world a better place. My last comment, with 2 sons involved in sports that take us out of the county and as a long-distance marathon runner, we now frequent the Whole Foods regularly, and I found we're now going to the one in Thousand Oaks. I love being able to teach my kids about the importance of eating healthy organic foods. Fortunately, it looks like Whole Foods is working its way north with the Oxnard store opening soon. I urge you to consider this project and approve the plans. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a couple more speakers. Hank Hurst to be followed by our new last speaker, Joe Saxon.
Thank you. I'm a recent property owner adjacent to the Whole Foods location. We have a property that we just acquired on Hitchcock, the YMCA across from it. It's about 10,000 square feet of office and 101 units behind it. And then we have the property just off of Hope and State, which is about another 10,000 square foot office building and 143 units behind it. We love Whole Foods there. In fact, if you could have them require building a ramp from there to our property, we would love it. But when we just bought the property, in talking to our tenants when we went around and did the inspections before we were buying, we asked them about the area, the shopping center, the Cumbre Mall. We asked them what do they think about the Whole Foods, and they were ecstatic. I mean, they really are looking forward to a Whole Foods being there. And you talked about maybe traffic. Well, they're saying they're going to walk to it. They're not going to be getting in a car and driving to a market. So I think you have less of an impact, at least for our people, our tenants. So we totally support it, and we look forward to having the center built there, and it's going to be a great asset to the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Joe Saxon, be our last speaker.
As a concerned citizen of Santa Barbara, I just want to voice my support of this project. I hope that Whole Foods comes to town sooner rather than later. I hope you all will help make that possible. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll also make note that we received numerous letters regarding this project, and I counted 34 in support and 3 that just questioned the process of the draft negative deck compared to an EIR. So with that, I will bring it back to the Commission for further questions or comments. Who would like to lead us off here? Mr. Thompson, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'll start it off. As far as, since we're not doing a concept review, I would make one concept review kind of a comment, however, and that is, even though I wasn't part of the Planning Commission that did the original concept review when a residential component was recommended, in looking at what is proposed now, I have to believe that the residential component entails larger units than what the Planning Commission most likely intended when that residential component was suggested. I don't know how deeply we can delve into that in subsequent reviews, but I think that it bears a little more in-depth look at it. As far as the environmental review, I think a mitigated negative declaration is the way to go based upon the information in the initial study. There are some areas that I think we need to be sure to look at, perhaps in a little more depth to ensure thorough mitigation. The proximity to the 2 creeks, it's already been investigated, but I think we want to make sure that we've done everything we can to rehabilitate and sustain the creeks in that area, which is a very intense urban use area. Traffic, we want to be sure, because of all of the major traffic problems that the Upper State Street area has, that we have done all we can to investigate and mitigate any traffic impacts. I understand that the traffic analysis for the intended uses show actually a traffic reduction from, or at least no increase from what the other uses are there, but I want to make sure we look at that thoroughly. And finally, parking. From what I can see, the proposal is underparked per city standards, and I'd like to make sure that we investigate not only the proposed tenant uses that are earmarked to go in there in the beginning, but anything that might go in there in the future. Let's say somebody decides to close up Circuit City and move in a restaurant or something like that, and if the parking demand would not support other uses, then we want to identify that and have the project conditioned so as to not have uses in the future that would overpark the area for what we're proposing. Many letters were submitted. I would ask staff to look at the issues that are raised and evaluate whether there are anything that should be included into the final mitigated negative declaration as far as mitigation measures. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just move from left to right here and call on Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Chair Myers. I was surprised to see actually so few people in the audience because the number of emails and letters that we received was substantial. And so I have to presume that a lot of people are at work or with their kids and couldn't come to support the project by being in the room. And so I especially want to thank the people that did take time to come today, and to thank the people who wrote letters and sent emails, because they have, I want to make sure they understand their voices being heard. The letters from the public were some of the most enthusiastic I think I've read in a long time. People are enthusiastic, they are thrilled, they can't wait for Whole Foods to come to Santa Barbara, and many of the good match between that company's ethics and the goals of the city of Santa Barbara are identified quite eloquently in the letters we received from the public. And there also is, I sense, some frustration with the process that has taken so long. And I'll just read one of them that I think sums it up rather nicely. This is from someone who grew up in Santa Barbara, and he says, "My hometown needs a Whole Foods market. Please get past your crazy bickering and grandstanding and let this company operate in my town." I don't think we've heard it quite so directly. So I wanted to just note that. And I support the match between Whole Foods and Santa Barbara, and I don't want to put up any insurmountable obstacles to this project. But I know this is not a concept review, but there is one ongoing issue that this project on this site keeps bringing up, and that is traffic and parking, and the limitations of the site to provide for the parking and traffic zoning requirements. We tried to address this in the concept review, and the housing was actually part of that discussion, as I recall it. The discussion was something like, the parking demand and zoning are driven by the square footage of commercial space. Why not have less commercial space and therefore less parking? And secondly, this is a large piece of property that could have a benefit to the city by putting some residential units there. Residential parking demand and trip generation is lower than commercial. So the idea was to trade out some of the commercial square footage for residential square footage. And I do not see that coming forward through this process. When we looked at the project in concept review, the commercial square footage was 69,581. And you'd think that it would have gone down in the next round, where we were hoping to see some residential added in and some commercial taken out. But instead, it came back with 70,446 commercial square feet plus all of the new residential square feet. And so really the parking problem has been exacerbated and not improved. And I know that the design team can address this, and yet it is a point of concern for me that the traffic and parking issues in this piece of property do not seem to be getting resolved. And I'm troubled by that, because I think they will be noticeable. As wonderful as the project is, we need to do everything we can to take a very close and accurate look at the traffic and parking. I don't think that we need an EIR, although if we did, a focus on traffic and parking would be the only place that I would support such a further study. And the environmental document ideally would include some alternatives or some adaptations or some balancing of the site, similar to what we talked about in concept review, which are to balance the commercial and the residential to minimize or to lessen the parking and traffic issues. I was also sad to see that the greenhouse gas component of such a green project would actually be increasing. And so the list of public benefits is long, long, long. The creek restoration, the store, the plaza space, and so on. But the parking just keeps coming back, and I don't think that it's going to go away. I think we need to take it and work with it in this environmental review process. One last comment, and I think another commissioner said it, we need a better inclusion of some of the other cities' policies. The Upper State Street Study, 1507, and the SD2 city policies, just to give us a good comparison of what our goals are for the property. The SD2 overlay zone is sometimes looked at as a design overlay, but it's not. If you read it carefully, it is a traffic control measure, and the effort of the SD2 is in part to lessen the amount of square footage on Upper State Street in light of the fact that it has limited traffic capacity. So SD2 really belongs in the analysis. And lastly, I'd like to see, regarding transportation, the bus stop on Hitchcock and how that interacts with the loading dock. That's a small tweak, but I'd like to get it in there regarding transportation and how pedestrian, bicycle, bus, and loading trucks might conflict. And with that one small but difficult nugget, I'd really welcome this project and its beautiful intent, and its high ethics and goodwill in the community, and we look forward to working and making it come, hopefully without crazy bickering and grandstanding beyond what's absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, my Whole Foods is the one on Coldwater Canyon. And I hit that one after I go to the Pacific Design Center when I'm on my way out of Los Angeles. And I use the restroom, and I just roam the deli going, oh, my God, look at that stuff. It's just amazing. And then I have to force myself out of there and start home before the traffic really hits. Otherwise, I could be there for 4 hours and probably not mind at all. I actually would be very interested in a focused EIR because of this, of the location, which is always traffic, traffic, traffic. And I think we really need to look at the traffic and the parking, which are my two largest concerns in terms of the outer State Street area. And I would be remiss in not wanting or requesting that we do a focused EIR on this project, which is guaranteed to bring plenty of people. It's going to draw from all over town and from out of town. So we have to, we have to plan for a grand event here. This is a big deal. And I'm still, I'm reluctant about the rooftop parking. The impacts of that, the aesthetic impacts. We haven't tried it. I haven't seen it anyplace either, come to mention. Although I've been looking for it since it was proposed in this project. Except on the Granada Garage. Yeah, well, and the Granada Garage. Well, yeah. But I'm not, well, all right. Enough bickering. I want Whole Foods here too. But I do want to do what I'm supposed to do, which is ask for the focused EIR, I feel. So let's get the focused EIR done and start eating. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really have only the traffic and parking questions as my concerns on this project. I think, and again, we are purview today has been squished down to environmental and not concept review. So I say I'm concerned about the parking question in the area. I really appreciate Mr. Thompson's comment there. Let's call it this is the Trader Joe's syndrome on steroids, perhaps. It's what we experienced on De La Vina Street there, and we kind of had to play catch up. But those are the areas of concern that I have, and of course I too look forward to Whole Foods making its way here. I have lots of concept review comments, and I'm just going to hang on to them.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to try to hold my comments to the negative declaration, do the best I can here. I think just to start off with, a negative declaration, when done well, can do just about everything an EIR can do in less time, with less cost, and with less heartburn for everybody. And I think that is the direction that we need to stay on with this project. I think this project has so many well thought out aspects to it that it makes sense from an environmental assessment standpoint to work extra hard to get an ND, a good quality ND, certified so we can move on and make our judgments on the project. That said, I have four general comments that I think could improve the draft ND. In the plans and policy discussion, I think this needs to be expanded to more completely and succinctly evaluate the project's consistency with the recommendations and maps contained in the Outer State Street study. If staff is unable to do that in the EIR, it is an absolute essential element to have before us the next time we look at this project. The Planning Commission asked that these maps be used in project reviews when it made its recommendations to the City Council, and the City Council supported that recommendation, and this is the first major project to come before us. So I think that that is a paramount piece in this planning puzzle that we've got. Secondly, I think the design and the layout of this project will have positive or negative effects implementing that Outer State Street study, depending on how well it looks at the area in block-by-block terms and not parcel-by-parcel terms. It's a conundrum that we've got to deal with, and we've got a site plan up here that stops at the property boundaries, and I understand that. I think the ND needs to give a little bit better treatment to the creekside environment in the biological section. I believe the project has a 22-foot setback in portions, and the biologist is recommending 25, and there's further direction in the comments, the preliminary comments that this commission made at the original concept that the project really maximized its creekside setbacks. The general plan also shows creek buffer areas as it marks the Arroyo Burro and San Roque Creeks in green as they cross the edges of this site. So all of those things come together to tell me that creekside buffers and setbacks are a very, very important issue for us to consider. How you deal with that in the EIR, I think we're headed in a good direction, but it's coming. Traffic and circulation, I think this is a tough one. I would like to see more treatment in the cumulative traffic section. It's short, it's sweet, and I think we really need to acknowledge what we've heard with the development trend study, if only to recognize that there is a great potential for future build-out potential along the Outer State Street study. I know you don't want to speculate as to where, when, and how that development takes place, but I think that the document warrants some reference to that as something that we're going to have to deal with long-term in a cumulative sense. On the parking issue, I think a number of my colleagues have raised the parking concerns, and the parking modification forces us into making those exceptional findings. And I'm going to look to staff to look beyond this parcel. If there's not enough parking on this site, it makes it very logical to go the extra step to have that bridge across to Hope Avenue, because that's where we have a tremendous amount of parking. And that would be a very clear linkage to make that modification. Lastly, on the visuals. The visuals, there's a very well thought out restoration plan that takes out the eucalyptus trees along the creek. That makes sense, even though it's a radical change from what the physical environment is going to look like. But that is going to have a change in the visual character along that corridor. And I think whether it's the restoration plan, it has to look at a bigger piece of vegetation coming back, whether it's sycamores or willow trees or whatever. That needs to mitigate not only the biological but the visual as well. Because I'm worried that we would be shocked in 2 years after the project goes up to see that development right there. So those are my comments on the ND.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I've been looking forward to this review and actually development in this area for a long time. This was my home. I was born and raised about 500 yards from this site and grew up in these very same creeks. And this is now the third time I'm going to see these properties developed. You know, first time it was the bowling alley in the 50s, and then that was torn down in the 70s. It became the Akron, and then now it's maybe the third time. Maybe we can get it right. So it's a great opportunity. I think that as a community we have more to gain by doing urban repair and fixing our mistakes than continuing to sprawl and just do these new developments on virgin land. So I think this is a great opportunity that the community can really benefit from. And I was stunned last night in going through all the material and seeing all the letters in support. And after coming to the meeting today, it reconfirms my suspicion that happy people don't come to meetings. So anyway, this is a great day for us, and I think it's good timing as well. I think the issues that this project faces are mostly related to the traffic and parking impacts because everybody anticipates it will be a successful business. And I hope that the presentation that we saw last week on the computer transportation modeling that's going to be done not only in the city but within the neighboring communities will be up and running before this project really gets back to us, so that we can really test scenarios of what happens if we adjust the commercial footage versus the residential footage. And I have to believe that even though we put, you know, another market in this town, I don't think we're going to be eating more in this town. So I don't think we're generating any new trips. I think it's just going to create benefits elsewhere in town on maybe other impacted intersections. So if we can figure out how to deal with it locally, I think there's other benefits that spread out through the community. So hopefully we can, like others have mentioned, I think we need to look at this project in context with everything else that's happening, you know, on Outer State Street and throughout town, because they're all interrelated. So hopefully we'll have those tools in place in a few months that we can actually do that. I think this project has a lot going for it. I think the restoration of the creeks is imperative, especially on Arroyo Burro. That one has been so channelized with the culverts and everything, and that's the one area where I wish perhaps it could go further. What happens on State Street is you have no perception that there are creeks. They've all been put into culverts. You drive down the road, you don't know that there's a creek there. You have no sense of a bridge. I wish maybe we had enhanced paving or some railings to replicate where the creek is and really acknowledge that we have creeks in our communities, and maybe those become the start of pedestrian paths and linkages to the residential neighborhoods that want to walk to the market. So I think we need to think beyond what we're seeing already and get other ideas rolled into the project. But I think the connectivity is the key one, and I like Commissioner Jostis's idea. If there's any way we can push the bridge concept sooner for pedestrians, I think there's a good nexus there. If we're concerned about traffic, there's a lot of residential in the neighborhood that could walk to this market if they could get there. So I think the mixed use is a good idea on this site. I am concerned with the parking, but I think The issue there is the diagonal sewer, the city sewer that runs through the property. And I wish there was a way we could deal with that differently, because that's restricting the ability to put parking underground. It's forcing parking on the roof. I would like to be convinced through an EIR or even in the negative deck that there isn't some other option or way to handle the sewer, because that seems to be driving the parking situation. Also, the sustainability aspects of this project are huge. I think compared to where we are now with all the impermeable surfaces, it's a large improvement. I think the project currently is going to be asking for fewer modifications than what we saw in the staff report. We heard at the site trip that the buildings in the front have been reduced. There's no longer encroachments into the setbacks at Hitchcock and State for the corner building. So hopefully, I think as the project grooms itself and goes through the process, we can work out the items that appear to be stumbling blocks in the eyes of the public. I think that the study is reasonably complete, but I do want to try and focus our efforts on the new modeling techniques that we're going to have at hand shortly, so we can really get our arms around the traffic and to study the parking issues more. So thank you.
Thank you. And I want to also reiterate a thanks to all of the letters that came into us. This project obviously garners a lot of enthusiasm and support from the public. People are very anxious to see it come to our town for a multitude of reasons. The ethical foundation which the organization operates under, as well as the products that they give us. So whatever we can do to hasten that, I think, is important. However, and first let me say that I do support the negative declaration approach to this project. I think that, as Mr. Justice said, we can certainly get all we need from that approach. And I also share the concerns that have already been exhibited here today regarding traffic and the analysis of traffic and parking. But I want to, in saying that I agree with and support what the commissioners have said, I want to bring forth what I think this project represents as a new, very green, very sustainable project in an area that we are trying to redevelop in the Upper State Street area. And in that, I think that we have to look at it a little closer, and we have to look at the whole area, as Mr. Justice said, with the mapping and the ideas and the plans that have come forth for the whole Upper Street area as a unit in toto. And there is so much that this project could benefit from by doing that. I mean, we've talked about centralized parking up in the Lacumba area with shuttle services. We've talked about the pedestrian connection to the Lacumba area for pedestrian access and more parking. All those things, I think, are critical to really understand a little bit better in this document and to move forward. I also think that what this project represents from a sustainable standpoint, from a carbon footprint, so that we can get our arms around that and see how that relates to the world and how it relates to future projects that will be coming down the pike in that area. However, I don't know, superficial, I don't know if that's the right word, that is at this point in time, how we can actually do that and how we can get our arms around that. We have to start to make those steps to understand that. So I think that is it. There's one other thing, and that is the unit size and the unit amounts. As Ms. Jacobs had said, we were looking at a little bit different picture here. I think that the final product that we get here is, or I should say the negative deck is influenced by the final product we get in that aspect, and how many units we get, and what the size of those units, and what impact that may have on the negative deck. So that's what I have. I see you grasping for your light.
Chair
Before you start, Mr. White has one more comment. It might
Sure.
influence whatever you have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, I'm always intrigued with Mr. Jostes' ability to take an environmental document and make it become whatever it needs to become. And the concept, I think what you're getting from the comments today is that there's still a concept review that's desired. I'm hearing, I'm feeling that there's things I'd like to be talking about in concept with this project, because I don't want to see all that money invested in engineering and that next big chunk of money that gets spent to make it into a finished product when there may be some sculpting and molding that goes on. So I say that is something I'm hearing others heading in that direction too. I've been known to be a lone voice up here on the various things, but I'm hearing in this situation that there may be a desire for that. So to the extent that the applicant team can consider that, I think it may speed things up rather than screw things up, and also lower your costs of getting a finished product going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree, and I appreciate Mr. Justice's comments. Thank you.
It's all yours.
Thank you, Chair Myers. I just thought I would go back and maybe comment on a few of the commissioners' comments on the initial study and draft mitigated negative declaration. Starting with Commissioner Thompson and wanting for staff to take a close look relative to the proximity to two creeks. The site is very constrained by the fact that it is at the confluence of two creeks, which also have a very restrictive flood control easement. And this also pertains to the comment about removal of the trees within the creek and what can be replaced as part of a restoration plan, because we have struggled with this with the flood control district. They actually prefer the existing condition because their equipment is very accessible to get into the creek. And initially we had a very nice restoration plan with lots of nice big trees in there, and they will not support us replanting a lot of trees in that in the creek area. So we're still working out some of those details, but I do agree that there needs to be some additional visual analysis about the changes that will occur as a result of removal of those trees. The creek setback issue, as you're well aware, we don't have a standardized requirement for a creek setback from any other creek in the city except for Mission Creek. And so the biological assessment looks at a number of different distances from different measuring points, including the 100-year flood control flood line, the top of the physical bank as it is today, or the top of slope, as well as the theoretical top of bank if this was along Mission Creek, how we analyze that or measure it. And so you're presented with a lot of different statistics about how far back the building would be located. Not having a set standard in which to measure the project, we rely a lot on what the biological analysis says and what the level of impact would be. Clearly, the project that's being proposed improves the situation out there many fold, and that can't be stressed enough. We have met on the site and talked with the Regional Water Quality Control Board as well as the Army Corps of Engineers, because there's a fairly significant creek stabilization program that is proposed, because the creek is where it comes out from underneath Taco Bell is eroding away there, and the applicant is proposing to do quite a bit of stabilization work. And, you know, yes, the creek
the setbacks could be increased and there could be a number of improvements that are done to the slopes, but actually the agencies don't want to see a lot of disturbance because the slope in that location is stable. It contains a number of significant oak trees. They don't want those touched. So while there are going to be some impacts and it's not a perfect situation as far as creek restoration, it's a grand improvement over the existing conditions. This isn't an urban environment, so we're balancing that. What may be appropriate in a more rural setting might not be appropriate here. So I just want you to keep those things in mind when the project comes back before you, and in considering the level of information that was contained in the initial study. As far as traffic, this project has been in the process for a number of years. It originally started off with a traffic report done by ATE. We took a look at that report. There were some concerns about the level of information that was provided to us, the uniqueness about this particular project being proposed. At the same time, other concerns with projects on Upper State Street came up, and we asked the applicant, as well as some other applicants, to take a time out so that the city could complete the Upper State Street study. We undertook that study. Not only did it look at some design issues along Upper State Street, but also traffic, and looked at that fairly comprehensively. When that study was completed, we then asked the applicant to go back and hire the same consultant to do a more thorough traffic analysis for this study. So we've had ATE, the Upper State Street study, and now a very comprehensive study on traffic for this site. And the conclusion here is that with these two intersections being improved, traffic impacts would be less than significant. Not that there won't be any impact or that it's not going to worsen conditions out there, but according to the city's thresholds, it will not cross the threshold and be in the area of a significant traffic impact. If it was there, we would be preparing an EIR, and we would be looking at alternatives to the proposed project. But CEQA directs us, when we do not have a significant impact, to prepare a mitigated negative declaration. So talk about what an EIR could do or couldn't do in that realm. It's not going to provide us with alternatives. You very well could do that as part of a concept review. You have a lot of discretion in that level of impact between when it's crossing the threshold of significance down to zero, the adverse impacts. You need to make findings in order to approve projects. In that area of policy consistency, you have the discretion to ask for certain things. Parking, again, that's another area where, yes, they are short one parking space based on a parking demand study. I think the parking demand study was done accurately. It's a fair assessment. I don't have a lot more to say about that. The questions, there was some other issues brought up about the size of the residential units and what had been expected between a previous concept review and here, and again, hopefully you'll have opportunities to speak to that in the future. I would really welcome Chair Myers telling us how to get our arms around that greenhouse gas assessment thing, you know. We're trying. We're
Other
really
communities
trying.
are doing it.
Yeah.
Far.
So we did include some information here. You did hear from the applicant back in December about a lot of features that were being incorporated into this project to address sustainability. I think they are definitely leading the charge and setting a high standard for other projects to follow in the future. So hopefully we're going to learn more from them about that. As far as policy analysis in the document, We always have this rub with you about how much to include in initial studies versus where should it more appropriately be in the staff report. You definitely are going to get that analysis, and I can assure you that we did look long and hard at the Upper State Street study package and looked at this project and made sure that it was complying with what those directives were at the time. I think we do need to go back and look at Hitchcock and the bus stop and the loading dock and potentials for there to be conflicts there. I think that's a very good comment. And I think pretty much I have touched on everything. Rob Dayton is here, and if you have specifics that you want to ask about the traffic study, because it went way beyond what we have normally required from applicants, and a lot of additional analysis in there that is summarized in the initial study itself, but included in the study that is an attachment to the initial study. So with that, that's it.
Thank you. Questions? Any questions or comments? Mr. Dayton, do you have a comment?
Mr. Chair, yeah, I would like to have the opportunity just to let you know exactly what's been going on in our shop for the past 6 months or however long it's been, maybe a year. After we got done with the Upper State Street study, it's no mystery that the concern and part of the genesis for that study is the developments that are coming forward, one of which being Whole Foods. And so we also understood very rightly that this is not an average grocery store. This is more of the Trader Joe's, at least from the market range, not from this type of store it is, but in a market range, we understand that Whole Foods will more than likely draw from a larger market range versus something like Albertsons or Gelson's. Just like, as we all know as locals, just like Lazy Acres draws, many of us shop there all the way over on the Mesa for certain items that we can't get anywhere else. So we know that, and we looked at that. We actually made sure that when we looked at this, we had another consultant look at the past traffic studies and look at specific Whole Foods markets throughout the Southern California. We looked at those. We looked at how much parking they were supplying. We wanted to make sure that in terms of trip generation rates, that we were looking at the right trip generation rate. Also, very important to that is what is the pass-by factor, because with supermarkets they can have up to a 50% pass-by factor, so even though they would have a large trip generation rate, that's actually cut down quite a bit by the pass-by factor, which we didn't believe that Whole Foods should get that high, because we do believe it will have more of a regional draw. And so we scrutinize these things very, very carefully, and what I believe you have in this mitigated deck is you have a very clear understanding of what this Whole Foods will be expected to generate in terms of traffic. And I just want to be clear about what Ms. Andalora said, that there were 2 specific traffic impacts found, and those are mitigated, and that's why it's a mitigated negative declaration. Commissioner Larson, I tried to argue for an EIR as well, and I see the light. I understand why we couldn't get that, not because of the legal hoops, but because of the public disclosure we expect in this room. And so I just want you to know that we went to the full length to make sure that we were analyzing this Whole Foods appropriately for what it will be. And in terms of parking, I want to let you know that the parking ordinance, that's the 5 spaces per 1,000, is a very unrealistic number. In other words, the ordinance we're starting off with is, I don't know if we have a use in Santa Barbara that's 5 per 1,000 that could actually generate that. Maybe on a Christmas, or after Thanksgiving sale, yes, but that's not the norm. And so when you look at the modification that you'll be asked to consider, I just want you to keep that in mind, that the ordinance is out of the park We did look at the demand. We did, just as we did with the trip generation, we looked at what is reasonable, what it is. And as you know, and I've said in our workshops before, we gave you a magic number, but remember, parking demand it's a range, and it's a seasonal range. It's when is the season for shopping, and when is it higher, and we believe that the number we gave you is the one that's going to for this Whole Foods, it's going to be met the majority of the time. Now, there will be times, just like every other use in Santa Barbara will, be a certain day during the year, and we try to look for the highest 30 days. There will be a certain number of days where the parking demand is not met. We believe the vast majority of the days it will be met with a number, and notwithstanding that there is one parking space below demand, so we still have that to deal with. But I just wanted you to hear from me exactly what we went through, and that we did honor your concerns, and we went through a process that I believe was very comprehensive, and we came up with a conservative answer for you to consider in this environmental document.
Thank you, Mr. Dayton. Mr. Thompson. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Jacobs.
While we have Mr. Dayton there, I would like just to take a minute to understand better the proposed mitigation, that by altering signal phasing, the intersection would improve from a 0.82 and go down to a 0.72. That just seems like magic to me, and I'd like to have a better understanding of how that could be. And the next question, obviously, is why don't we do that all up and down the State Street corridor?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Jacobs, it's a little bit of magic, yeah. What it is that when we all turn left in an intersection, obviously the opposing movement can't go straight, right? And the side street, they don't get a green, right? But there is opportunity when someone's going left. You notice that two crosswalks are now, pedestrians can't cross in two places, right? Where the left turn is emerging from and where they're going to. Those crosswalks have to have red. The right turn that coincides with those left turn movements has a red signal as well. However, they don't have to. They could actually have a green arrow that goes at the same time, the left arrow, and these cars could be doing this at the same time. There's no problem with that. And it turns out that in two situations at Las Positas and State, going north, there's a lot of right turns there. If you're experienced with that intersection, there's quite a few, more so than the average signal, and also down at Calle Real coming south, there's a lot of right turns because that's where you get on northbound 101. So there's a lot of right turns that can overlap, that actually can get a green time with that left turn signal. So it turns out with all those people not stopping and then waiting for a gap to go, and with the red, stop and then go and then stop and then go, you just give them a green, you get a lot of cars through on that overlapping phase, and that lowers or improves the overall level of service for the intersection. It is something that we can look at for other intersections in Santa Barbara, although I'll tell you the situation's quite rare. It's not something you would find a lot of downtown. It's mainly in the conventional roadway system where you don't have the grid that you'd find that kind of condition. I think that there's one other signal that we identified that would benefit from this type of improvement in the Upper State Street study, and I think that was at La Cumbre and State. And I think aside from that intersection, there weren't any others, at least within that study area, that would benefit from that treatment.
Yeah, Chair Myers and Commissioner Jacobs, I'd like to point out that there are actually a couple of intersections in where I live up in the San Ynez Valley where they've done that in the last 9 months or so, and it has made a rather magical difference. I was surprised at how much difference it actually made. There are a lot of right turns on Alisal going north and turning right onto 246 or Mission Drive, and there are a lot of right turns that happen going south on Alamo Pintado, turning onto 246 and going into Solvang proper. And it's made a huge difference in how traffic operates at those two intersections since they did that. They did the one in downtown proper first and followed with the other one. And I was rather surprised by how much of a difference it made. And that's certainly anecdotal, but it's certainly something that was noticeable too.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. No formal action is required today. I will state that the public review period ends on June 4th, 2008, so if anybody has anything further that they want to submit to staff, feel free to do so before June 4th. Thank you very much. Our next item is item number 5, which is our administrative agenda. We have committee and liaison reports for the last few weeks, I think. Does anybody have any committee and liaison reports? I see none. So we'll go to the review of the decisions of the staff and hearing officer, which I believe also was done last week. So we're complete there. That was only mistimed by, I don't know, 3 minutes. Right. Which brings us to the review and consideration of the Planning Commission's resolution and minutes. As was stated before, the draft minutes of February 14th, February 21st, and resolution number 009-08, 3230 State Street, along with the draft minutes of April 17th, the special meeting as well as the regular session, and resolution number 013-08, 210 West Correa Streets will be continued to next week. So I would entertain a motion to approve the previously reviewed draft minutes of February 7th, 2008, along with resolution number 004-08, 130 Garden Street, resolution number 005-08, 222 West Alomar Avenue, resolution number 006-08, medical marijuana dispensary permanent ordinance recommendation to City Council, along with the draft minutes of April 24th, 2008, and resolution number 014-08, 3339 Cliff Drive.
As corrected.
As corrected.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move that we approve those as corrected.
Second.
I have a second from Ms. Larson. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? I will be abstaining from the draft minutes of April 24th and the 3339 Cliff Drive resolution.
And I from the 24th as well.
And I from the 7th and the 14th of February.
Okay. Okay. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you. Zowie.